Go ahead and get started because we have a really full schedule for you today. I'm Katie Cornell. I'm the Executive Director of ArtsAVL, formerly known as the Asheville Area Arts Council. We've had a couple of different names over our 70-year history. We actually started in 1952 as the Civic Arts Council, and our original goal was to build a performing arts center, which became the building that we're in today. When the building first opened, there were actually 4 resident arts organizations: the Arts Council, the Asheville Art Museum, and the Colburn Earth Science Museum, now known as the Asheville Museum of Science, as well as the Symphony. We are the official designated arts organization for Buncombe County, and we connect, support, and invest in the arts in our area. This is the first in our 2023-2024 event series. Our event series are focused on highlighting how wonderful our arts sector is, the impact it makes, as well as addressing the issues and opportunities facing our local arts community. Our next event is our State of the Arts Brunch, which will be on October 30th at the Orange Peel. This is where we talk about the state of our local arts sector. We hear from leadership in the city and the county about how they support the arts, and we present our John Cram Arts Leadership Award, aka the Crammy. And this year, it will be presented to Brian and Gail McCarthy. So, that information is up on our website, artsavl.org/brunch, and you can buy tickets now. We have 3 more events in our Town Hall Series. Our next event will be in November, and we'll be presenting or talking about the results of our Arts and Economic Prosperity Report that we have been working on over the past year in partnership with Americans for the Arts. This highlights the impact of the nonprofit arts sector on our community, and we will have a representative from Americans for the Arts coming to talk about our findings. In February, we'll be partnering with Explore Asheville to talk about how they market the arts here in our community and how our community, creative community can take advantage of that. And then over this next year, we're going to be doing a report on creative spaces. We want to keep our creatives here in our community, and we know that the cost of living is driving them out to other counties. And so we'll be presenting the results of that impact study and having a panel discussion about how we might address some of these issues in May. I want to thank our event sponsors for making this event possible today, as well as the other events in our series. Especially want to thank the North Carolina Arts Council, the City of Asheville, Explore Asheville, Morgan Stanley Private Investment, Blue Spiral One, and the Friends of Brian and Gail McCarthy. I also want to thank our Arts Coalition. We have a team of arts leaders that help us plan these events, as well as help us set our policy agenda every year. So now, without further ado, I'm going to introduce Chris Corl to give you an update on Thomas Wolfe Auditorium.
Hey everybody, thanks for coming. I appreciate it. And special thanks to our production crew for setting up the entire Arena Theater early for this. Our next setup needed to be this, but not quite yet. So they're a little early, speeding things up. I appreciate that. So Thomas Wolfe Auditorium, status and future. So our current challenges you may have read about in the news. We currently don't have any operable heating or air conditioning in the seating and stage area of the Thomas Wolfe. This started out in May when we were hosting an Asheville Symphony event, actually, the Amadeus Festival, the final event with Bela Fleck. We had some reports of water coming out of the ceiling. We investigated that. found our air handler unit number 1 had a coil failure. We set a mitigation plan in place and we moved forward best we could in order to keep hosting events. As we went through June, we were noticing some more failures with our remaining units, really just loud noises and some other challenges, but we felt like we could keep moving forward. And then July 3rd came and we hosted a sold-out show with a band called The Smile. And that was a challenge show for us. It got to a little over 86 degrees in the room and about 79% humidity. And we lost the 2 remaining air handler units that night, just being overworked trying to keep up with the system. We didn't have any medical issues that night. We gave out a lot of water, had some paddle fans. We had a good mitigation plan in effect. But that caused us the next day, well, we took July 4th off. But July 5th, we started closing the Wolf. So we started the process of moving our events into this setup that we were already under the starting of creating, and temporarily rescheduling. In some cases, we lost the show to another market just when the arena was already booked. I'm too far from the computer. There we go. Oh no, there we go. So our fiscal impact. A big challenge, obviously, is not having the room open, so we're losing some revenue. We're expecting about a $1.2 million reduction in our annual gross revenues. We don't, however, think that's going to affect our general fund needs from the city as a whole. We're an enterprise fund. We do think that we're going to be able to keep enough events, moving them into this setup, that we can avoid having to draw additional funds from the city. And we also feel like we're going to have an estimated reduction in the facility's economic impact this year of about $20.5 million, which is about a 27% reduction compared to last year. How we got to these numbers, we haven't had an economic impact study done in the last 2 months. We took our most recent, talked to the person that helped put that together, and made sure that we used the right parameters to escalate that to the current year. So we took our attendance, our event revenues, all the factors that go into that, put that into a spreadsheet, got the blessing, and that's how we got to these figures. So the Thomas Wolfe project as a whole, this is a well-studied project. It's been in the news off and on for 2 decades. In the last 20 years, there's been 6 different conceptual designs or feasibility studies completed. We've had 3 ancillary and operational evaluations completed for a total of 9. And there's been reoccurring themes in all of those. So as you can see here, the results are always similar. Major infrastructure needs, life safety improvement needs, rigging, loading, and back of house, which anybody that was just on one of the 3 tours, you probably noticed there's a lot of challenges in our back of house spaces. The acoustics and the lighting and audio are challenges in that room. It's really great for some events, really poor for other events, trying to find that really good medium. And then the bathrooms, seating, patron flow, and food and beverage services that were just really confined in the spaces there. The one consistency in all of these outside of just the recommendations is that each study has shown a consistent increasing expense for the renovations. So every time that we've said, what if we do X, Y, Z, it's been this, and then this, and then this, and then this, and it just keeps stair-stepping up. So after this failure happened and we closed the room, we've had a lot of requests for, well, what would it cost to renovate? What if we did this? What if we did this? What if we did this? So we went back to our design team, which is Earl Swanson Associates, that we used in the 2020 study that was released in January of 2020, and asked them for a menu, if you will, of options. If you do a room that can do Broadway, it would cost roughly this much. A really great acoustic room, a flat-floored room, just fix the infrastructure. And so that's what I'm about to show you here. And I just want to be clear with some of these numbers. They had about 3 weeks to put these together based on past studies and using current construction escalators. So I think they were really conservative and made them high. And then our city capital projects team went in and added our owner costs and the other things that would come with doing a construction project to get to the numbers that we're at. So these are like high estimates and ranges that were put together really quickly. So I just don't want somebody in a year to say, well, you said it was going to cost this much, because we haven't gotten to that point yet. So first and foremost, the 2020 study that we released, which was a Broadway hall. So the projected cost in 2023 is 140 to 160 million. We're also including in all of these figures a 2028 figure under the assumption that if we started moving really quickly, once you design, go through the permit process, all the steps, 2028 is really the most realistic start for a renovation of a theater. An acoustically driven, really significant renovation project is a next step down as far as pricing. So in that 2028 figure, we're around 130 to 150 million. An improved rake floor arrangement. So this is essentially, as you can see, keeping very similar to what we have in the room already, but improving patron flows, F&B, bathrooms, et cetera, and some back of house. We're in the 105 to 125 million range. Multi-purpose flat floor arrangement in the 90 to 100 million range. This is like a Fillmore style setup where you're flat floor, so it can be multi-purpose for weddings, banquets, sporting events, concerts, comedians, etc., and then a balcony. I do want to be clear, this is the only one that we have not previously studied or done a conceptual on, so there's not a ton of data, and our design team, like I said, had 2 weeks to come up with numbers, so we have not yet vetted this, as the community hasn't asked for that to be vetted yet. And then just current infrastructure and code updates, so just taking the challenges with the Wolfe and like getting the building back up to what it could be in the future and what it was, but keeping all things essentially the same with loading, seating arrangements. This number does include new seats though, however, is in the $42 to $52 million range. So moving forward, it's clear from those numbers that any renovation is a major upgrade, right? Like these are major projects. It's going to involve a lot of different entities to make something happen. So the questions are, what does the room want to be? Not every room wants to be a Broadway room. Not every room wants to host a wedding too, right? Like this room is not a place you would host your wedding. So like, what does the room want to be and what do we want to put in that room? What does the community expect from the room and what does the community want it to be? And then really the big one, what's a realistic budget for a project like this in our community? And should we design a project that fits within our comfort, or should we design one to our community's aspirations? Because I can tell you from 2020, with all the stakeholder engagement and all the surveying that we did, we designed a room to the community's aspiration, and we got a $100 million project that everybody's jaw dropped on. So is that really the type of project that's realistic in Asheville? And those are the types of things we need to ask ourselves. So moving forward, I'm going to pass it back to Katie here.
Awesome. Thank you, Chris. All right, now I'm going to bring our panel on the stage. Of course, you've already met Chris. We also have City of Asheville Mayor Esther Manheimer joining us today. We have our new Planning and Urban Design Director, Steph Monson Dahl, joining us. We have President and CEO of Explore Asheville and the Buncombe County Tourism Development Authority, Vic Isley. We have Executive Director of the Asheville Symphony, Daniel Crupi, joining us.
My bad. My bad.
Chris, man. And then we have Conceptual Planner for the Theater Consultants Collaborative, Robert Long, joining us. All right, we're going to backtrack a little bit. Before we get into these beautiful new designs, we want to talk about impact. And I'm going to start with Daniel. Daniel Crupi and the Asheville Symphony have had an exciting few months. They've had to move their whole series in quick fashion, and they've done an excellent job, but it's taken a toll, and it will continue to take a toll the longer it takes to renovate this space. So Daniel, you want to tell us a little bit about that?
I would be delighted, Katie. Thank you. And thank you to you and to ArtsAVL for putting together this town hall. Thank you to our mayor and to all of our panelists for joining us today, and Harris Cherokee Center for hosting, and to all of you for coming out. And a special thanks to the Symphony staff who's here today that facilitated that whole season transition. They've done amazing work. Yes, bravo to them. So before I get started, I want to kind of gauge who our audience is here. Can you raise your hand if you consider yourself an Asheville Symphony patron or are a member of the orchestra or involved with the youth orchestras? Raise your hand. Nice. I love it. All right, so we're kind of preaching to the choir a little bit here. Nonetheless, for those of you that didn't raise your hands and are not familiar with the Asheville Symphony, we are one of the largest performing arts organizations in Western North Carolina. We have a $2.5 million operating budget. We have an annual economic impact of between $6 and $8 million a year. We employ, in a given season, over 140 professional musicians from all across our area and make this an artistic and creative and wonderful place in which to live and work. And over the course of a season, we reach between 40,000 and 50,000 patrons all throughout Western North Carolina, of which 7,000 are children or students that experience our music education programs. So it's a robust organization. It's a multifaceted organization, diverse organization in terms of its reach and its breadth. And to answer Katie's question about, what is the impact of a closure of Wolfe on the symphony, I do not think it is exaggerating to say that every single number I just cited is in jeopardy with the closure of Thomas Wolfe. It is an existential crisis for the symphony. We can weather this sort of storm for a couple of years, but if it drags on in perpetuity, the symphony is going to have a really hard time making things work. And that is because our economic model is built on putting large groups of musicians on a stage, sometimes 60, 70, or as many as 90 professional musicians on a stage, sometimes combined with the Asheville Symphony Chorus, which is a 100-voice ensemble. So trying to find a hall that is large enough in the audience as well as on the stage to accommodate all the musicians and also to offset the enormous expense is incredibly difficult. And we've been able to make it work this season, as Katie alluded to, by moving to some extraordinary partner venues, First Baptist Church of Asheville, the Wortham Center for the Performing Arts, even Brevard Music Center down in Brevard, North Carolina, and Salvage Station. But it has, the incremental expense increase is enormous. We're having to do double performances, which increases our artistic cost by about 20%, and our capacity is reduced. So we're getting hit on both sides, on the expense side and on the revenue side, and it will break the organization if it continues for too long. The other thing I think is important to reference is it's not just those classical concerts, the pops concerts that you see at Thomas Wolfe that are at stake. It's our entire community impact. So those concerts help subsidize the free Symphony in the Park concert that you will experience next week, this Sunday at Pack Square Park. They help subsidize the educational programs we put together for 2nd, 3rd, and 4th, and 5th graders all through our city and county for free. We have to privately fundraise for those, and organizations like ArtsAVL help us pay for them. But ultimately, those concerts that you experience in Thomas Wolfe are bankrolling these educational and community engagement initiatives. So all that to say, if with Wolfe closed and without another comparable performing arts facility, the Symphony's educational and community engagement impact is grossly reduced. The economic burden, the financial burden to the Symphony is greatly increased. Our economic impact in terms of a tourism driver is greatly reduced. And the status of the organization and the musicians also that rely on this organization to make a living, all of that is in jeopardy. So for us, the situation is very, very dire.
Other than that, Mrs. Lincoln, how was the play?
I have more. You want me to keep going?
Well, and that was a great segue. A lot of businesses are impacted, not just the Symphony. Tourism market is down. A lot of businesses are feeling it. Vic, can you talk a little bit about how other businesses are being impacted and why anchor destinations like the Thomas Wolfe Auditorium are so important?
Thank you, Katie, and thanks for having us be a part of this important conversation for our community. And I would just like to give kudos to Chris Corl for strategically making it really hot as hell in here. So that's really helpful from a strategy and cost-benefit analysis for us each individually. And seriously, economic concerns plus real and perceived public safety issues have negatively impacted spending in downtown businesses from residents as well as visitors. We've heard from retail, restaurant, entertainment businesses, not to mention our lodging partners, that sales are down anywhere from 10 to 20% year over year. And now that Thomas Wolfe Auditorium has failed due to lack of basic maintenance is a double whammy for our businesses and livelihoods. Based upon what Chris shared, the city estimates that even a partial closure, again, doing great work with paper clips and duct tape here, the cost to our economy is going to be around $20 million spending in local businesses outside of this facility. These self-inflicted wounds are really painful. They end up stinging business owners, staff that are trying to pick up shifts, artists whose wares are sold in our downtown shops and galleries, and ultimately it impacts revenues that the county and city use to run our government and services for our residents. Just to give you an idea, in April alone, Buncombe County sales tax was down about $315,000. That's about 10% year over year. That's what's relied on to deliver services for our community residents. And let's face it, if you're in this audience today, you probably know that entertainments, the arts, and our economy are intertwined. And Thomas Wolfe is an entertainment, engagement, and economic driver for our town. So we have to know and recognize what makes a healthy economy and community, and frankly, where the money comes to support it and make it happen.
Well said. Chris, can you talk a little bit more about the economic impact of the Thomas Wolfe closure?
Well, so first of all, it is comically ironic that the air conditioning is not working today, but it will be working shortly in the arena, and we're working on that. Yeah, so the economic impact really, it's just related to the events and the business that come in, right? So like if we can't bring in 2,000 people for a concert on Tuesday, we're not going to have that extra boom. And we've been really focusing on those midweek events, the Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday events specifically, dating back to 2018, where we were less than, I think, 10 per year, and we're up to 30 plus. So we've really been trying to grow that early week business, which is the challenging business to get. But the tourism in our town is actually what helps drive that. Most artists won't come on a Tuesday if you're going to Winston-Salem, for example, because they know that they're not going to have the ticket draw. But in Asheville, they can come on a Monday or Tuesday, and they know that there's people that are going to come into town to watch these shows. And a lot of our draw in the non-symphony concerts is like 70-80% out of market. So we're really bringing in business from out of market. Plus, you know, by having more performances here, it reduces the leakage, right? Like if you have to go to Charlotte to see Ray LaMontagne, we're losing that revenue as opposed to keeping it here when it's in our room.
Thank you. So we're going to move on and talk about some of the opportunities that are happening around Thomas Wolfe, not necessarily in this building. So first, I'd like to ask Steph Monson Dahl about the visioning process for the Haywood Page project and where we are with the Pit of Despair / Pit of Possibilities, and how that might be roped into a renovation of Thomas Wolfe.
Okay, yeah, I like that you said Pit of Possibilities. Some people call it the Pit of Hope, and for those who had not lived here for the last at least 2.5 years, maybe 20 years. We're talking about the city-owned property that's directly across from where we're sitting now. I think the way that it fits in is that if we were able to take advantage of investing significantly in this place and think about it in a really holistic way, we could amplify the effect that Thomas Wolfe has on our community. So you have to think about it from the standpoint of when people are visiting here, what are they doing next? When they roll out after seeing a show or an event, do they have a place to sit down and take a breather while they look at a guide and figure out where they want to have dinner? Where is that comfortable spot for them? The one great thing about the plan that carries forward is that it is envisioned to be a mix of both public and private development. So it actually adds more opportunities for things to do in one way from a private sector perspective, jobs, all of those things. And in another way, it adds more things to do just from a free perspective, and especially for families. The second part of this with considering Haywood and Page is that it's an opportunity to think about adding more partners to the mix. So I think Council has asked staff to bring back the Haywood and Page plan and take another look at it, specifically not to say we're definitely going to be implementing this plan right now, but to make sure that we don't miss out on any opportunities to partner in the community and on a more regional basis.
Wonderful. Also in the news recently, it looks like the Duke substation is going to be moving from behind the building. So Chris, I'd like to ask you to tell us what that would mean for the renovation project.
So yeah, we haven't seen anything official from Duke yet, obviously, but they have really indicated that they're interested in moving, which moving is really good for the Thomas Wolfe for any future expansion. The substation, for those of you that were on the tour saw it, or maybe you just know from living in town, it's about 40 feet from the back of the Thomas Wolfe is this wall, and on the other side of the wall is the substation. So the high power lines that run through there don't allow us to build all the way up to the property line. And so Duke has been a great partner, asking us what we need of them if they rebuild to allow for Thomas Wolfe to expand. And we've given them all of those parameters, and they've been really willing to work through that to try to find that right footprint where the substation could move and still allow something to be built out from behind our building, whether that's the Thomas Wolfe or an expansion on the arena. And what that is, we don't know, but it really allows the opportunity for something bigger. Every study that's done of those 9 that I mentioned earlier, the substation moving was never an option. We never gave that to any design team to let us look at something that didn't involve that substation there, because we didn't think that Duke was ever interested in moving it. So moving out is cheaper than moving up, right? And we might have a lot of opportunity to do something more without having those high power lines so close to the building. So I'm really excited to see what Duke puts out there soon, to see if we can incorporate that in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
Well, I would just add, so that nobody freaks out, we're not talking about moving it across the street. We're just sliding it down to the corner. So it'd technically still be behind the Civic Center, but in a more convenient location.
Well put.
Sorry. Yes, that's important information. So my next question is going to be for Robert. And for those of you who don't know, Robert has been a part of this conversation for 20 years in different phases. And so I want to ask him a little bit about the 5 different proposed options and the pros and cons. What do you see as being the pros and cons of those 5 options?
Well, thank you. Let's review them so that everyone remembers, and it's not a test, but there was what I think we labeled the Broadway approach. It's how do you make the stage bigger, wider and deeper and taller. That was the most expensive one. The next one, I think you said, was the acoustic-driven. Acoustics is hugely important. Now, everybody be real quiet for a moment. You know, we want to hear a pin drop. We don't. Thank you for the air, Chris, but this is not acceptable. So it's really, how do you make it just so quiet that every little word or tale of music is perceived? And so that's the next level. And help me, because I know that we were going to the raked.
Yeah, an improved raked version.
Improved rake. It's like if I can't see you in my mirror, you don't exist, or something, whatever that is. But if you can't see what's going on, you're going to lose interest. So we have to have good sight lines in any format. I know what the last one is. Number 4 was
flat 4.
Flat floor. This is all about the conversation with the next generation and what they are going to be interested in pursuing. And then there was the infrastructure, just fix the things that are broken. Okay, so we know that. The implication is money. We can do so much. I'm a theater consultant, but I represent a design team that includes architects, structural, mechanical, electrical engineers, food service, traffic, health and safety, acoustics, theater, parking. So it takes a lot of people. So I just know that I am trying to speak for a lot of people. In our business, we often say the loading dock drives the building. The loading dock at the Thomas Wolfe is the most antiquated, convoluted, dangerous loading dock that one truck can get to at a time. So just know that. The point of bringing that up is everyone should know that there are three parts to this building. There's the public area, the auditorium and stage, and the back of house. If we move something in the front of house for handicapped reasons or aesthetic or comfort or size, it's going to affect the rest of the building. So there is no one simple move, Katie, that we can take. And that's why it takes so many people working on this issue. We came to a very exciting conclusion 2 years ago that if we take, this isn't the Thomas Wolfe, but if this were the Thomas Wolfe stage, if you drop it, I think 23 feet, it facilitates loading, it increases the volume for acoustics, it allows better sight lines, and it would allow for a transformation of the Thomas Wolfe Auditorium. It's all about money. So, in our conversations, we've all agreed that we might work in the arts, but it's about politics and economics. We've got to line up the politics and the economics to make sense. So how much do we have to spend?
That's a really great segue to asking the mayor where the funding is going to come from for this project.
So before I get into that question, let me just say, first of all, thank you all so much for coming and sweating it out here with us. It's wonderful to see so many people in the community interested and committed to seeing something happen with the Thomas Wolfe Auditorium. And I also want to thank all the folks who have volunteered on the millions, but less than 10, but committees, task force over the ages that have looked at this issue for the city and thinking about the future. So luckily we do have our most recent version is extremely thorough, and you saw the renderings of that. And I wanted to mention we've got some elected officials here that were able to make it today. I know Councilwoman Maggie Ullman's here. I can't see you all. Not only did I forget my glasses, but I'm also blinded by the light. And I know County Commissioner Terry Wells is here, and if I'm missing anybody else, I'm sure I am.
Yes, that was part of my intro that I completely forgot about. I am so sorry. I would like to thank our House Representative Eric Ager for joining us today, Commissioners Terry Wells and Martin Moore. I'd also like to thank City Council members Maggie Ullman, Shanika Smith, and Kim Roney.
Oh, good. Thank you. All right, I wasn't able to see everyone. And I also wanted to mention, as many of you probably already know, we have an incredibly talented staff at the city, and Steph Dahl was just named our planning director. This is hot off the presses, so that's really exciting. And she's already been with the city 18 years, and has worked on some incredible projects like the River Arts District, RadTip redevelopment project, downtown placemaking, and leading the Pack Square visioning process. So she knows how to think big and be bold, so that's really exciting for us. And Chris Corl, who you've already met here, in charge of the Civic Center, but also just led us through the process of looking at McCormick Field and how to redevelop it. And one of his incredible skill sets is to be able to run the numbers for us, figure out the pro forma. How can we piece this together? How can we put together all the funds that we're going to need to make a big project happen? And you saw the numbers up there for what the various options cost. And to put that in perspective, I think the city's budget we just passed this year was around, I believe is around 240 million or so. I'm probably off slightly. And the size of the projects that we've historically dealt with, the RadTip project, maybe a 75 million, I'm ballparking, project with a lot of different funders, the state, federal government. McCormick Field, we have many, many partners on that $37 million project. So the scale for us, we're really at the point where great things happened in the city, great things were built, and now they need to be rebuilt. So trying to tackle how to do that when we have a revenue mix for this city that is mostly dependent on property taxes. We get some sales tax, as Vic mentioned, but unfortunately cities in North Carolina receive a fraction, a tiny little fraction of the sales tax collected in our cities. And we have fees and charges and some other sources of revenue. The voters voted for general obligation bonds in 2016, the first large package really since maybe 1980s. And we're just completing that now. That was about $72 million, I believe. So just to give you some context, I think people are like, why haven't you done this project already? What's the big deal? It's a big deal. So it's a real challenge, but I'm very glad and fortunate for us that we have great advisors to be able to guide us through this process. So in terms of funding, there's a few components here. One, you've got your funding partners, which we will be leaning on, but the Tourism Development Authority is an obvious one, able to help fund a project like this through what was once called the Product Development Fund, and I've got to get all the names rolling off my tongue these days. And thankfully, due to the incredibly hard work of a bunch of local folks here and our legislative delegation, we have a change in that formula. So now instead of only a quarter of those funds being available for capital projects, now a third is available for capital projects. Yes, yay. But the TDA's guidelines right now limit that funding to 50% of any project. So we have that limitation challenge to deal with. So we obviously have the city as a funder. There's county commissioners here, and I'm going to take that as a strong positive signal that we might have a county partnership as well in this project. And I think, obviously the Symphony brings some funding to bear with all of its generous donors and other private donors and sponsors who might be available to contribute to this mix. But driving the version that we select is also what funds can be generated from the venue itself, right? So if you build the venue to a Broadway version, you get Broadway. Broadway brings X number of dollars, and so you can change your pro forma based on that. If you do an acoustic-driven or a rake floor version or the flat floor version, different opportunities exist, so your financial picture looks different under those different scenarios. You might not have as much revenue stream if you pick one version versus another to help offset that debt service burden on the city and ultimately on the taxpayers in Asheville. So those are the things that we'll have to consider with the guidance of staff and others that know how to put these numbers together for us as a council to be able to consider and also to help inform us so we can go out and talk to our partners and describe the project and talk about what level of partnership we're going to need from them, that we'd like from them, which is exactly what we did with the baseball field. And I think that no pun intended, set the stage for us to do the next big project. So to me, I think this is an amazing opportunity. I understand the city makes some revenue from it, but this is really our civic duty as a city to provide a forum for people to enjoy the arts, to enjoy one another, to enjoy their community, and also support our economy here in Asheville. And I very much believe in that.
I think the question on a lot of people's minds is, why renovate? And so to keep you in the hot seat a little longer, can you talk about why the city's looking at renovating Thomas Wolfe instead of building a new performing arts center?
Okay, all right. So when I was first came to office in 2009, I think one of my first of 100 meetings was about a performing arts center in Asheville. 100 meetings about a performing arts center. So there, as you know, and maybe a lot of people out there were involved in a project to try to build a performing arts center in Asheville, and the city was engaged and a partner, and we even purchased land as one location. It was next to and below the city hall where we park our police vehicles now, I believe. And we assembled the acreage there, and the conversation over the years evolved. And I stayed a part of that conversation, but it was a very viable opportunity, and it impacted how we thought about Thomas Wolfe. So we should just wait on Thomas Wolfe. We don't really know what we're going to need it to be because there's going to be this performing arts center, and maybe the symphony will go there, and then we'll do Thomas Wolfe. We'll do something different with it. So there was this constant sort of, but what if we do this, or but what if we do that? And the conversation continued. It then morphed to where it might involve a state partnership and might be constructed on state land. And then the signals for that opportunity diminished, at least for now and for the next several years, I am told. So it came back to us. Remember, COVID also happened during this whole time. So we had this study, and then all of a sudden nobody needed a public venue for a couple of years. But I think for now, the stars have aligned. It has become clear that a performing arts center or a performing arts space might happen one day, but it's not going to happen immediately. And there's demand for people to come back together in a venue like the Thomas Wolfe. Locating it in another place, I have studied all the possible locations. I have heard all of the advice about this. But I think at this point, the preference is to renovate the Thomas Wolfe where it is. It has a lot of positives in terms of its location and opportunities through the renovation, and Chris can talk to you more about the cost of building new versus this. Let's not forget, it also already has a parking deck, and the cost of building a parking deck alone is astronomical right now. So I would say that that's sort of how things have settled, at least from where I'm sitting, in terms of why we're firmly landing on a place where we're looking at renovations of the Thomas Wolfe. And obviously this has, I would say there's two things that have been catalysts for this. One is that we just did this McCormick Field, and I can't emphasize enough to you how sort of monumental that is to bring lots of partners together to do a significant multi-million-dollar project in Asheville. There's not a lot of, or any, other examples you could point to where that's happened in recent memory. So we just figured out how to do it. Our muscles are really strong about how to make that happen. And then all of a sudden we're facing some significant costs here. So it brings it to the fore in a very emergent way. So I'm just one person on council, but I know that council has voiced as a body a strong concern for maintaining and renovating city-owned assets, of which this is one. So hopefully there will be support for a proposal coming forward to us.
So you mentioned McCormick Field. And the city, the county, and the Buncombe County Development Authority all came together to make that project work. And so I'd like to ask you and Vic, just how did it work, and if something similar could be applied to this project?
I'll take that. Well, thanks, Katie, and thank you, Mayor and Chris. Chris and I, along with Tim Love from the county, had lots of meetings about that, I will say. But first and foremost, the Tourism Development Authority is an investment partner with Asheville and Buncombe County. Since 2001, we've invested more than $80 million in lodging tax in tourism-related capital projects. More than half of that has gone to city-owned facilities through grant requests. So our fund works that a government partner or a nonprofit partner applies for grants through a competitive process. So through that, we've invested more than $5.5 million in this facility, in the Civic Center side of this facility. Just recently, $1.6 million in Asheville Municipal Golf Course. And most recently, pledging nearly $23 million to renovate McCormick Field into a year-round multi-purpose facility. As the mayor mentioned last summer, local hotel owners advocated and successfully got passed changes to the state legislation that regulates the usage of lodging tax in Buncombe County. So for those of you who do not know, every single county in North Carolina that has a lodging tax, it has to pass through Raleigh. So that's good fun. That change not only changed the formula from 75 to 25% to 2/3 into marketing to generate dollars and businesses here every day, but also 1/3 into tourism-related capital projects. So that maintains the 20-year-old Tourism Product Development Fund, but it also created the Legacy Investment from Tourism Fund, or LIFT Fund, because we're an industry that loves acronyms, and if it was going to be an acronym, it was going to spell something, by gosh. So the LIFT Fund was created and can be used for a broader purpose. Design, so design costs of an upfront project, maintenance, restoration, rehabilitation of infrastructure and natural resources. It's a little sidebar, but we advocated for changes including natural resources because if many of you have been to a vacation on the coast of North Carolina, lodging tax has been used for decades for beach renourishment. We don't have beaches, but we darn sure have trails and greenways and waterways that attract visitors. And so that was a supported change in the legislation. And importantly, that means we can also be a more viable debt service partner through the LIFT Fund and the Tourism Product Development Fund. And that's how we were able to invest in debt service for 15 years for McCormick Field. So we worked for over a year with city and county staffs and really encouraged them to think bigger than baseball, because we need to be thinking more holistically and strategically about protecting, evolving, and building community through these types of projects. And it really is more powerful when we're doing it together. So Katie, you asked earlier, projects like this one serve as anchors in the virtuous cycle of driving our visitor economy and our local economy. These kinds of facilities draw visitors to our community who contribute to the lodging tax, but also are paying for goods and services in our local businesses. And that ultimately fuels funds to improve and invest in new projects and also help support support projects through the city and county budget. With that said, Thomas Wolfe is owned by the city. And ultimately, it needs to be the city's priority to approach the authority to be an investment partner in making Thomas Wolfe what it deserves to be for our community and our economy. And our board feels really strongly that we should be investing in properties that will be kept up through a long-term maintenance plan. I will say, being a part of this community, I am thrilled by the possibilities that we have of working together. I think there's more opportunity for more of us to win when we're pulling in the same direction. And I really hope that this is another chance for us to do that. And I'll just also end by saying that the mayor mentioned bonds back in 2016. And we as residents of Buncombe County just passed bonds to work with conservation and with affordable housing. As we continue to grow and mature as a community, we as residents need to be prepared to invest in our community through these ways and alternating. There are many examples in North Carolina of communities that can do it. And if they can, I know we can too.
Mayor, is there anything you'd like to add?
I hear Vic's point. This is true. For whatever reason, Asheville historically has not been in a rotating cycle with general obligation bonds regularly showing up on your ballot. So we hope to change that and kicked off the 2016 bond initiative, which was hugely successful, Parks and Rec bond, transportation bond, and a affordable housing bond. And we are planning for another bond cycle to hit your ballot in 2024. And so, it is, we have done a lot of planning. We have a lot of documents prepared. We know we've identified our capital needs in the various categories that you can put bond issues on a ballot for. So plan on seeing those, and we're hopeful that this will continue as a regular cycle. It's a healthy way to maintain and build your capital projects in your city, whether it's sidewalks or rec centers or playgrounds or housing or your facilities that need either maintenance or construction. So So we're hopeful that will be a continuation, and I think there's every reason to believe voters will want to support those kinds of bonds initiatives. They just did, of course, for Buncombe County. We can only run those in even years, on even year ballots, so, but that's probably plenty of opportunity to do that.
Awesome, thank you. I want to go back to Robert. And, Robert has been part of this discussion, as I mentioned before, for a long time. And he's also worked with a lot of other communities building new performing arts centers or renovating their performing arts centers. So what kind of lessons learned, takeaways can you share with us, Robert?
That's a difficult question. Takeaways from working with other communities on their projects.
And hard lessons learned from this discussion, too.
Well, fundamentally, culture is such a deep part of society that we can't live without it. I don't think we ever would. And we keep reinterpreting it, but it is fundamental. It goes back to when the first societies ever got large enough to come together, and they would be possibly around a campfire for security or warmth. And when you couldn't get any more people around, you backed it up onto a hillside. And the Greeks built their theaters into the hillsides, the Romans built the hillsides, and we've been doing it ever since. We've been creating places where we gather. And I guess the biggest lesson is that we have to get more people into our facilities and not just cater to the same. We need to broaden the offerings. We need to really make people feel welcome to come to our arts facilities. That's how you future-proof what we're doing. Just get more people involved. So I hope that's sort of one answer I could give you. The other thing is lessons learned is construction is so expensive these days. It's scary expensive. And, we're learning this compared to 3 years ago, Chris, when we were looking at costs for this project and seeing how they, due to the pandemic and the supply chain, how they've just gotten huge. So it's calming down, but things are expensive. So. But the best lesson is we keep wanting to do this because it's so wonderful.
Can I jump
want to
in on
congratulate Buncombe County. I just read on my little news feed that it's number 3 in the state for the tourism impact of all the counties in the state. So that's really important.
Chris, did you want to add something?
Yeah, so these projects are inherently hard to fund, right? You've probably been part of many. And I think of DPAC and I think of the Tanger Center as 2 really good examples in North Carolina. DPAC took a while to get off the ground, but once it did, it didn't necessarily pay for itself in direct spend, but it's that economic impact that we keep going back to. The Tanger Center failed on 2 bonds, right? So it failed twice on bonds before it got built by the city with community partnerships with lots of different entities in there. And it ended up, I think, $94 million in 2020, and it's already getting hundreds of millions of dollars in economic impact. So it hasn't been paid off for the city of Greensboro yet, but the impact that it's bringing is just insane. So figuring out what that space is and just knowing that it's not a direct payoff right away, it'll pay off in time. Like, I don't know what the Wolf or the Arena cost to build back when they were built, but I'm sure by now we have paid ourselves off over the last decades, right?
So my next question is, Mayor, why is this time different? Why are we going to act this time?
Well, first of all, I think we have to do something. So that's always a good motivator, unfortunately, to make real things happen. And I think, luckily, we've done all our homework. All the studies have been done. All the options have appeared before your eyes. You see what they are. The community input has been provided. There's been a robust process leading us to this point. We're through the pandemic, and we know the demand will be there. And I like hearing the suggestion around diversifying that demand and making sure we ensure that future generations want to come to this facility and see a show or whatever they're going to do to enjoy the space. So I think there's a lot of momentum, and again, for now anyway, the idea of having an alternate performing arts center is quieted and doesn't seem to be on the forefront right now for our community, not closing that door forever. So our path is clearer at this point, what we need the Thomas Wolfe to be for our community. And we just did a big project. This is going to be bigger, but I think we're ready to think about how to do that with Chris's strong guidance there. So to me, I feel like the table's been set. You know, we're ready to try to do this, but we're going to need community involvement and encouragement. And we're going to need partnerships to be able to make this work. There's a reason the Tanger Center is called the Tanger Center, and that's because the Tangers gave $7.5 million to make it a reality when it never passed a bond referendum vote. We don't have a Tanger here in Asheville, but maybe we have some other opportunities for partnership. I think this is a great opportunity for us to do it. We need to do it, and I'm willing to put some sweat equity into it and equity.
That's great to hear. So this next question is for the entire panel. I'd like each of you to say why this is important. Renovating Thomas Wolfe Auditorium is important to you and to our community. So I'll start with you, Vic.
Why, thanks, Katie. I think
welcome.
things falling down from the ceiling are a perfect reason why we should be doing something now.
It's just confetti.
I believe, people who know me know this, I believe in the power of travel. I believe of what it does to connect us to people, places, and cultures. And I think that's what venues like this do in our own communities. So I, with my whole heart, believe that these kinds of places are places for entertainment and the arts. They're places for engagement, for celebration, and they're also an economic driver for our community. And we have to think holistically and strategically about that, and not only what happens within these four walls, but what happens within this facility that then builds and leverages throughout our community. And that's what my hope is.
Daniel.
Thanks, Katie. For the Symphony specifically, I mean, a renovation would be absolutely transformative in terms of what we can present to the community. We are somewhat limited, even technologically, by what we can present in Thomas Wolfe, given the current constraints. So having a facility that is technologically robust and state-of-the-art would totally transform what we can present and who we can serve. We could have a great deal more family programming, a great more diversity of programs, much more frequent, regular performances as well, with a facility that can really accommodate it. Also, I do think, we haven't discussed this too much today, but I think there's a connected opportunity here, because we're not just talking about Thomas Wolfe as a performance venue. There is, as we just heard when we were talking about the substation issue, assuming that does transition, there is a whole expansion that could take place to move that backstage of Thomas Wolfe out into the space where the substation currently rests. And that affects not just the existing stage area, but also an area underneath of the stage. So there is a whole lower level that would be developed that could be really utilized for the community. I mean, this could be, first of all, a rehearsal space. A lot of performing arts centers have a similarly sized rehearsal space underneath of the stage with the exact specs, which essentially doubles Chris's revenue because the symphony can be rehearsing on the lower level while a rock concert's getting ready to go on stage upstairs. So you can double your revenue and your impact. And I think there's a huge opportunity to build out some rehearsal space, classroom space, workshop space for arts organizations that need affordable rehearsal space or artist studio space, for the symphony to run the Asheville Symphony Youth Orchestra program out of, or any of our other community engagement activities. So there's a huge opportunity to activate more than just the house and the stage of the auditorium. And then the third thing, I mean, a performing arts center, it is like your community's living room. It is where you come together for conversation. It's where you go to be inspired. It's where we hold our graduations and dance recitals and experience the symphony and experience art and powerful, inspiring experiences. And it's also how you showcase your community to the rest of the world. When they come, they travel in to see Asheville. Thomas Wolfe is part of the perception that we are giving of Asheville to the rest of the world, and what do we want that to look like, and how do we want to reflect upon Asheville? I think that's an important part of the equation as well.
Robert?
So in my world, I was just upstaged by Daniel. Not much more I can say. But I do want to say a great hope is that we can actually get something done so that the wonderful technical staff and operational staff of this facility don't have to work with electrical boxes that I saw in my grandmother's house, that the rigging is not from 400-year-old sailing technology of sandbags and ropes, and it's just safer, more efficient, and these are things the audience doesn't really know about, but it's all part of it. So I'm here to lobby for the technical staff.
Good for you. Steph?
Okay, yeah, everything has already been said, almost. I'll underscore one thing, and that is the dance recitals. And what I mean by that is this is a place for the community, no matter where you are in Western North Carolina, to come and make memories. You don't have to come and smile. Everybody that grows up here is going to remember this place. But what I will say is maybe we should do it for downtown. So we've been talking a lot about reinvesting in our downtown, wanting it to be clean, wanting it to be green, wanting it to be safe. We need to have facilities in our downtown that match our vision of downtown. It's not easy to get there. It's not for me to advocate for this, and I understand, but yes, thank you, Mayor. The mayor can take part of this place, but if we have a vision for downtown being if this is our living room, downtown is our front porch. That's what our downtown master plan says. It's a place where everybody can come, and I will repeat something that you said earlier that was really important. A few people touched on this, is that as we move forward for the next 20, 50 years, we are not going to look like this audience. And we need spaces where we can diversify the types of events and have everybody see themselves reflected in a different way. And this is the kind of facility that can do that. It's our public spaces and our cultural arts centers that do that. So downtown.
Yes, downtown. Everyone has said a lot of great things, and I think these are all really important reasons. It is a community space. I have attended funerals in Thomas Wolfe. I have attended award ceremonies. I have attended Reparation Commission, community outreach, and hearing sessions. So to me, it needs to serve multiple purposes to bring people together, to enjoy one another and to have an experience shared together. But I will also say that spectacular things make spectacular cities. And if you've been visiting cities the last couple of years, you've seen some that are atrophying and are struggling, and their downtowns are dimming. And then there are others that seem to be thriving and growing and have memorable sights for you to see and things for you to experience. And that is important for visitors, and that is important for locals. But it is also important for the health and vibrancy of your city for years to come. So you're creating a space that infects in a positive way an entire downtown. It encourages people to want to be there, to want to work there, to want to live there, to want to have their experiences there. And if you don't continue to grow these ingredients, you will see an atrophying downtown, and that is not what we want in Asheville. So to me, this is a key ingredient to supporting the future of Asheville.
there's no way I can come up with a new one at this point. But I think a big thing for me is, I work here, right? So this is like my job. But when you look at our reviews, whether it's a Google review, online surveys, any of these things, we always get really high marks for our staff and the friendliness and typically clean venue, but it's always, like this issue with this seat or the production sounded terrible. Like it's always facility related things that are like truly out of our control, and our staff does a really good job. And I'm sure like the #1 person that's interested in this project is probably Xana, who's back there running the cameras today, our production manager. She makes everything happen in that room, and she does some really long days that could be cut in different ways if we renovated that space and did something really good with it. But then also the most important one really I would say is for the kids. And I just bring this up because like I've got 2 little kids under 10. They came to see Lindsay Sterling, I think it was, either last December or the December before. And like it was a constant of like, how do they do that? How do they do that, right? And he, like my son is so interested in this stuff now. Like he like made a stage out of his bunk bed for like a month later, like making all these like things with his like Lego toys. And they just get really, really into that stuff. And like it's how you open it and inspire, like Daniel was saying. I mean, my daughter started ballet a few years ago after coming to an event here and seeing that there were other little kids on stage at the Nutcracker, and she was like, can I do that? And so like you have to open that opportunity for the desire to come.
I just want to piggyback on that because I did poke fun earlier. But those of you in the audience that have been in hospitality or around it, back of the house is called heart of the house. And it's because the heart of the house is really what makes it sing. And while I did say paper clips and duct tape, this team here has done amazing things to make events happen again and again and again for our community and guests and performers, to be honest. Because if you're heart of the house and you have some of the acts that Chris has been able to bring into this community come in that one loading dock with one truck, that stinks. That is like not the reaction or presentation we want for our community. And so the heart of the house here is really strong. We just need an extreme makeover.
So we have been collecting some community questions over the last few weeks online. I thank you all for those that submitted questions. We're going to leave that open. You can still submit your questions online, and we'll be sure to give those all to the panelists. But for now, we've selected a couple of them to ask the panel today. The first one comes from John B., and he's asking how this was allowed to happen, how we got to this point with Thomas Wolfe Auditorium.
I'll follow on that one. So allowed to happen is, I think, a strong phrase. We have, similar to the baseball stadium, like we have maintained this building. We just haven't reinvested in the building, right? So like when something has broken, we've fixed it. When the next thing broke, we fixed that. Budget constrains what we can and can't fix. People bring up the peeling paint on the ceiling to me all the time. The last quote we got for that, I can't remember when it was, but it was like well over $100,000 just because of the scaffold build and rental to redo the ceiling in that room. And when I say redo, I mean like take off the chipped paint and repaint it. So with all the other infrastructure needs in that building, it wasn't a high priority to deal with the paint, right? We have plumbing, electrical, and HVAC issues that come up quite frequently. So as those have failed, we have fixed them, and they have historically not failed to the level that what just happened this summer. Like it just finally went to a point where all 3 of our functional units died at one time, where we've had different failures periodically that you just never knew existed. I'm sure there's Symphony members here that have had drips fall onto them from the ceiling in the past, but we've dealt with those and they were fixed by the next Symphony event, for example. The allowance of it to happen is really just the lack of reinvestment, and that there was decades where City Council did not have a capital maintenance plan budgeted for this venue. And back in mid-2000s, Council at that time had the forethought to, one, put money into the arena here, but also put like a dedicated amount of money every year that we have for the facility as a whole, to do capital maintenance. A lot of that goes towards our debt service for the renovation for this room, but everything else has gone towards repairs and small upgrades. So we fix things when we can, but really it made more sense once we started investing in the arena to continue investing in the arena and make one thing that we had as good as we could before trying to spread it out over 2 rooms. So really it was priority based on the budget that we had to do the most that we could with the money that we have available.
Well, please send your comments to us, and we'll make sure they're passed along. So you go to artsavl.org/townhall, and there is a form on the page where you can submit comments and questions. All right. Mayor, was there anything else you wanted to add? Okay. So our next question is from Justine M., and she's asking about naming rights for Thomas Wolfe Auditorium. Has that been explored? What are the advantages or disadvantages of naming rights?
Well, so naming rights were a major factor in what we've done in the arena here between the U.S. Cellular deal initially to move from the Civic Center to U.S. Cellular Center, and then again when we transitioned to the Harris Cherokee Center. So it's private funding that comes in for the equity of your name, right? Your name, image, and likeness, as the NCAA calls it. It's certainly an opportunity with the Thomas Wolfe. We've had interest in the past, but it's not something we've shopped. As we went through the Harris Cherokee naming process, there was a lot of community input asking if we were changing the Thomas Wolfe name because there was a desire to keep that name. I think it should be on the table if we want to look at a project this big, but that's really a bigger community discussion. But I would also note it has only been the Thomas Wolfe since 1975. It's had 4 different names since 1902. So are we really married to a specific name?
So, Chris, there's a naming rights for the greater building or the center. There's naming rights for the auditorium, for the green room, the dressing rooms, the lighting systems, the stage rigging. I mean, you walk through newer performing arts centers now and there are plaques on everything. So, and that's a good thing because more people are participating.
Yeah, and I think it's important. The name of the venue itself almost always goes to a corporation or like one really significant donor, right? But then there's these smaller donors, lobbies, restrooms, seats. There's a lot of opportunity in naming rights, and right now of our 4 like room properties, if you will, being the complex, the arena, the banquet hall, and the Thomas Wolfe, we've only sold the complex and the arena. So we're sitting in the ExploreAsheville.com arena, which is tied to a grant that we worked out with the Product Development Fund and the TDA. So there's a lot of opportunity here that we can help bring in. But typically that's a nonprofit that's out there selling a lot of those sub-naming rights, right? Like the bathrooms and the seats. And I think we'd be looking for a group like the Symphony or the Arts Council to assist us in that side of the house.
Perfect. So our last question from the community ones that were submitted is from Sean C. And he asks how the proposed plan aligns with the city's broader cultural and economic development goals for the downtown area. I think Steph's a good one to answer that question.
What if we answer it as a group? Because I think we can make a statement here together. The first thing I'll say is, if you don't know, Katie Cornell was our past immediate chair of the Public Art and Cultural Commission, and she knows this, but our Public Art and Cultural Plan says Asheville is a work of art. That's how we like to put it, and we like to put arts and culture at the front of any thoughts about economic development when we're making investments. We already talked a little bit about downtown specifically, bringing in diverse acts, being the social center. Everybody has made these points, but why I said I want to answer this as a group is because I want to bring back some numbers into the conversation. Chris, you mentioned that it's an estimate, but the loss of having this facility closed just this year would be how much?
$20.5 million to Buncombe County, Asheville City.
Yeah. So the city does a lot of things. One of the things we try to do is to make great places for great people to thrive. That money that Chris is talking about is not like money to the city, that's money for everybody. So are there any other pieces of that economic impact that we can share? reshare?
Yeah, just that if we were completely closed, it would be worse. So the number is 27.5 million, give or take, if we just shut down the Wolf completely. So that figure, the 20.5, is assuming that we are indeed reopened in November with our quick fix that we're working at a reduced capacity for non-ticketed events. So we'll be moving forward and trying to move events in here that makes sense whenever there's a theater show that we can fit in this room. It doesn't work great for the Symphony, unfortunately, because of the acoustics, but touring shows it will. But there's an opportunity to grow that too, I would say. Like any opportunity to grow that number is a great one. And I think 75-ish million as a whole is the economic impact for the complex wide. The Wolf could easily be half of that. It's a very busy room whenever it's open. So it could be much, much greater. If we're roughly 50 million in the arena already, getting to 50 million in the theater would not be that hard.
Good. Slight logistics thing. Can we switch back to the slides, please? I'm going to have to do a little catch-up, guys. Hold on, bear with me for a minute. All right. So, next steps. Can you talk about what the next steps might be and when we can expect to see Thomas Wolfe Auditorium back at full capacity?
Immediate next steps. So we started working on the repairs last week, Thursday. The team's in there starting tomorrow to do actual HVAC repairs. So that's going to get us open in October or November to a limited capacity. Basically, we're taking these 3 units that currently run all the air handling in the room. We're abandoning the middle one, the biggest, but the one that has the worst failure in place. And we're what I'm calling octopussing the ductwork together. So we're marrying the ductwork from all 3 together to 2 so that we can get some air moving in the space and start cooling it again as we fix the 2 units that we can access without building a catwalk and a fall arrest system. After that, we'll do a testing and balancing, which will give us our actual capacity, but we see it between 1,000 and 1,500, give or take. And at that point, we'll reopen for non-ticketed events, which is a lot of our events. We do a lot of non-ticketed events that you just don't know about because they're not advertised. And then any other free and community events. Ticketed events, we're not going to open up for initially until we can really get moving and see how much farther of repair we can get to. We would invite the Symphony back if they so desire for a ticketed event because they're a local promoter versus some of the partners we work with nationally. And then the next steps after that would really be related to the funding that we have available and whether we're going to do the full repair of the unit that we're abandoning in place, which is going to cost us roughly $1.2 million between a catwalk, a fall arrest system, and the actual repair of the unit itself. Or if we're going to use that remaining rent money that we have in our budget towards the first steps of design of something like we've talked about here. So it's really prioritizing that last roughly $1.5 million that we have available in our appropriated fund balance.
So there are some decisions to be made in the short term, whether or not the reserves for the that the Civic Center has are going to be exhausted doing the full $1.2 million repair to get it open in the interim. So that technically will have to be voted on by council because of the size of the contracts, but the funds exist, but that's obviously somewhat precarious to exhaust reserves that are designated for the Civic Center. And then we need to fund the design phase for whatever option we select. We will have an opportunity to apply for some funding with TDA, and we'll have to have conversations with them about what will best qualify for funding opportunities for those sort of immediate needs. And then I would hope that we're able to select which option to go with fairly quickly and get that design. We may need to have the design team sort of flesh out a couple of those options before we can pick which one. And then move forward with really getting into those numbers and figuring out what those costs are going to be and what the revenue opportunities are with the various options. So we can finalize one by going to all of our partners and figuring out who's going to be at the table and to what extent. and building that package of funding that's going to be needed to make this a reality. I do hear from some folks occasionally about, put it on the ballot. Everyone will love this and vote for it. But as you just heard, it did not pass in Greensboro with 2 votes, and the city ultimately had to find another way. And I will say, GO bonds are an interesting thing in terms of how to fund stuff. Interestingly, transportation is one of the most popular ones, with Parks and Rec kind of dragging down at a lower level. And I think it's probably based on usage. People go to the ballot box and think, well, do I need this for me? So a lot of times that's the equation, I guess, when they're voting on bonds. So this may not be a good one for a bond referendum, but it may be, like we did with McCormick Field, just more of a pulling together partnerships and figuring out our capacity to manage the debt service and what kind of revenue we'll be bringing in to offset that cost, which is exactly what we did with McCormick Field. So prepared and ready to try to do that again. And you saw the timeline for how long this will take. I'm hopeful it'll be on the speedier end of long, as speedy as possible, but there's a lot of things that have to fall into place, obviously. So we'll continue to need support and involvement with the community, and I've asked staff what else they need to be able to internally accelerate the process in order to get it to council for consideration.
Awesome. So the next question is, what can you do about this? You can send your questions and comments to us, as I've already said, at artsavl.org/townhall, or you can send your thoughts directly to City Council by emailing them. The mayor has already said they understand something has to happen and there is support behind this, but they need to know why this is important to you. So let them hear from you. Also, our Asheville Symphony has been through a lot, and we want to show our support, so I hope you will all come out this Sunday for Symphony in the Park, one of my favorite events of the year, and support our local symphony. And lastly, we're keeping this conversation going here at ArtsAVL, and our next big event is our State of the Arts Brunch, where we will be talking about the state of our local arts sector, including this issue. And so you can join us, buy your tickets, artsavl.org/brunch. I thank you all for joining us today, and I would love another round of applause for our panelists.